now that I have your attention? It's a strange substance, fire. Right, so it's technically classified as the fourth phase of matter. It's known as plasma. You can't grab it, you can't really get a hold of fire, but believe me, it can get a hold of you.
Okay.
It can change the composition of what it touches. The act of something burning is just that, to change in the composition of something due to heat or due to fire. Many things are changed in ways that are very hard to imagine, just from a little heat or a little pressure being applied to them. So have you ever encountered a problem or an issue in life where all you could do is look up and say, really? Why? Why, God? Why am I going? What is the purpose in this? What's the point? And then you start going through that and you see, oh, hey, there's my solution. Fantastic. I have a solution to my problem. And then you learn that solution is just a little bit out of reach. Maybe you could get to that solution if you had a little more time. Or maybe if you had just a little bit more money, it would be easier to come up with this solution to your problem. It seems that often that is the case, where it seems the solution of our problem is just beyond our grasp. It seems so close, but you can't obtain it. You can't get a hold of it. Maybe you get extremely stressed out because of the problem. And now you have even more stress added onto that because you see the solution, but you just can't get to it. Seems like what you're going through is just not fair. It's not fair that you have to go through this. It's not fair that someone is dangling the answer to your problem right in front of you and you just can't get it. It appears that it could even be your undoing, this particular problem and this solution that you can't get a hold of. So I titled this message, Forged in the Fire. Forged in the Fire. So let me talk to you for a minute about this stuff called carbon. Right? It's a basic element. It's a dusty, gray, black-like powder substance that can get all over you and make a mess. I work with this stuff rather frequently, being an electrician. With some of our machines that we have carbon brushes in there, and that stuff, when it wears out, gets everywhere. And it is hard to get off of you. So when you take that carbon dust, you compress it a little bit, you get this substance called graphite. It goes in pencils. Everybody's very familiar with pencils and graphite. We use them to write various things. So what happens if you take that graphite, right, that started out as this carbon, and you compress that graphite more? Instead of just a little bit of pressure, let's add a lot of pressure to it. Let's go down in the earth about 100 miles deep. We're going back to geology class from high school here, right? So that takes us to what's called the upper mantle of our planet, at roughly 100 miles down. Pressures there are about 725,000 pounds per square inch and around 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit. So those pressures, that's about 362.5 tons per square inch. That's about 145 Ford F-150s per square inch. A few Ford guys, which you all should be. Only two Dodge Rams. Square inch, right? So it's like a little square, about yay big is a square inch. 362.5 tons in that small area. So these conditions seem extreme. Yet it's here that one of the things that many people consider to be very, very precious are made. Naturally occurring diamonds are between 1 to 3.3 billion years old. And they're used from various things, from jewelry like wings, necklaces, earrings, watches. They're used in all kinds of things, bracelets. And they're even made in saw blades and computers these days. A diamond blade is one of the best blades you can actually buy for a tool that you own. It's very difficult to break them. But guess what? The base material for this beautiful gem called a diamond is carbon. This dirty, nasty, powdery substance that just gets everywhere and makes a huge mess. It goes through a process that will destroy most materials that you could find on earth. And it comes out as a pure gem that can be used in a variety of ways. That carbon would never become that beautiful gem, that wonderful diamond, with all of its great uses, without going through that extraordinary process and enduring all those temperatures and pressures and going through that metamorphosis that occurs. If only we could squish down some pencils we had in our pocket, we'd all be really rich. So Exodus tells us that they made a tabernacle to worship God. You can read that. It's in the first few chapters of Exodus. As they're wandering about the wilderness, they need a place where they can worship God, so they build a tabernacle. It was pretty much a big tent. What it was. They moved around a lot. They needed a place to worship God, but they needed to be mobile. So they built a big tent. In that tent, though, it was by far the most elegant and most beautiful tent that was there. Had all kinds of beautiful draperies inside of it, and you can read all about that in Exodus. And then we move on to 1 Kings, right? They get away from the tabernacle. And in 1 Kings chapter 5, we start reading about the making of the temple, right? Solomon's temple, which replaced the tabernacle. So it was built around the 10th century BC. One of the things I found very interesting is the Bible takes drastically longer to describe the temple, how it's built, what's kept inside of it, and the order of things inside the temple, than it does to talk about the creation of everything.
That's true.
Found that interesting. So this was a temple that Solomon built. The Bible mentions that the temple was made of costly stones and of cedar beams. I don't know how familiar some of you might be with that area in Israel. There's not a lot of cedar trees growing around in the desert. It just doesn't happen. So they had to import all of these from Lebanon. It was a beautiful structure. It was classified as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Solomon called in some of the best craftsmen from around the entire region to make this temple. Inside of the Holy of Holies, nearly everything was made of gold. It was covered in gold. It was gold-plated. Very, very beautiful place. The temple lasted almost 500 years, till about 586 BC, when King Nebuchadnezzar completely destroyed it. Completely wiped it out. And then after Babylon fell, the temple was rebuilt in about 515 BC. And then when King Herod took power, he expanded and drastically upgraded the temple, trying to win favor. So it was finished in 20 BC, but it lasted less than a century. This beautiful structure that King Herod put all these resources into lasted less than a century as General Titus, the Roman Empire, came through and leveled it in 70 AD. Burned it, crushed it, completely flattened it. So what do we know about the way the temple ends up? We found out, we talked about how carbon ends up as a beautiful diamond. What about the temple that started out as a tent? If you go to Revelation chapter 21, starting at verse 9, it's talking about the New Jerusalem. John is in the Spirit. He was taken up in the Spirit, and he's shown New Jerusalem. So if you read Revelation 21, verse 22, it tells us, "And I saw no temple therein, for the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are the temple of it." So we go from a tabernacle, a tent, out in the middle of the wilderness, to this majestic building built by King Solomon, to another majestic building built by King Herod, and all that gets leveled, reduced to nothing. And we see that when it's all said and done, Jesus Christ himself becomes the temple. Talk about coming from nothing to everything. Wow. Jesus Christ becomes the temple. It's an incredible transformation. The temple had to go through some tough times to be able to be what God had in mind. It had to start out as that tabernacle and go through the tough times of being destroyed and rebuilt, destroyed and rebuilt, before it could become what it is and what it will be in the future as Jesus Christ. One of the most used metals today is steel. You see it everywhere. To make steel, you have to carve iron out of the ground. You have to mine it. So mining iron is not by any stretch of the imagination a glorious job. It's a very tiring, very physically challenging job. And there's a lot of risks that come along with crawling down into holes that have been blown out of the planet so you can chip away at rocks to get this iron out of the ground. And when it comes out very rough, not very pretty looking at all. It's got all kinds of other metals and minerals and stuff mixed in with it. It's not just pure iron. You have to take that iron and smelt it, which is where you put it into a blast furnace and you melt it at temperatures of almost 3,000 degrees. That gets rid of all the impurities. Putting it through that kind of flame, that kind of fire, gets rid of the impurities and allows for carbon to be added, which we talked about earlier. Another great use for carbon. Once the carbon content is right, they can now let that steel cool, and you have one of the most versatile metals in the world. It's used for a plethora of things, from cookware to support structures like beams and such, to some of the most impressive buildings. It goes to make car frames. It goes to make rebar for concrete. It even goes into the tips of your ballpoint pens. It even goes into the tips of some boots. What started as a brick of rough, ugly-looking mineral came out of the earth, goes through this fire, and comes out very strong and very useful. Look at the life of Jesus. He was God. He became a man. He was beaten, punished, tortured, and killed by crucifixion. His entire body covered with all kinds of gashes and bruises. And I'm sure they cleaned off all the dirt and all the blood that he had on him from his road to Calvary, from all the beatings and whippings, before they put him in the grave. He looked terrible before they went to put him in the grave. Just imagine that, just this beaten, destroyed body that they wrapped up and put inside the grave. Well, what happened? He had to be that lowly man. He had to go through that, the beatings, the torture, the punishment, so that in the end he could be remade. He came out conquering death, conquering the grave, being our Savior, being our salvation. He rose up in a holy body, made whole again. He went through all of those horrors so that he could be what God wanted him to be our temple. We have to go through tough times. And sometimes they're seemingly impossible. But it is the only way for us to be able to become what God needs us to be. The only way to get stronger is to exercise or train yourself. Our trials are God's way of training us for what's coming up next, so that we're prepared for it, so that we can handle it. We have to go through that fire so that we can be forged in to a new creation and a new tool for God. And one day, we'll go through that one last fire. We'll get forged one last time. And we'll come out of that in a glorified body, where there'll be no more pain, no more problems, because we've conquered them all through Jesus Christ. We'll hear those words that we all want to hear. Enter, my good and faithful servant. Man, what a day that's going to be. Until then, you have to keep your heads up, keep your eyes on Jesus. And remember that when you feel that heat, When you feel that pressure of what's going on, that's God forging you into something greater, making you something better for the glory of His kingdom, to serve Him better. Don't forget that. Just because you feel the heat doesn't mean things are going downhill. You guys know I'm extremely long-winded.